thank you for the introduction. And it's interesting as you sit and listen to your background and other people talking about what you have done. And you would think that with 25 years in technology and the business center, and 12 years in the military, and 10 years serving in urban ministry as a youth leader in urban ministry, and 5 years as the chair of my missions board at my church, you would think that I had figured it out. And you would think that my first trip into Africa would have been much more spectacular than it was. But see, I think I was sitting in the same place that most of you sit in and most of our churches sit in. And it's what we talked about earlier. I had a heart for the poor, but I didn't have a mind for the poor. I remember my very first trip into Liberia with my church, and it was the women's group, and we were going to do a women's conference, and we spent 6 months collecting everything that we could think of to take to these women. And we had t-shirts for the kids, and we had soap bars, and we had flip-flops and shoes, and everything that we thought we could give away because we were going to help. We were going to provide for those in need. That's what we were told, and that's what we were going to do. So we pack up and we go to Liberia. We're really excited. This is my first missions trip into Africa. And we get there and we realize that what we were doing was putting ourselves in a position of power. Unintentionally putting ourselves in a position of power. When we stood there, we had I thought we only had about 100 t-shirts. And we said to the kids that were there, we said, hey, bring your friends back tomorrow, come back tomorrow, and we're gonna give out t-shirts and some food, and everything's gonna be great. We're gonna do camp. And the next day we stood there and about 600 children showed up at the ministry site. And somehow we had enough t-shirts for every single one of those kids. It was like feeding the 5,000. But what we realized was that we were doing something temporarily that made us feel good about ourselves, but it wasn't necessarily solving the problem. Because as soon as we got home, the first question we got is, when are you coming back? And what they were really saying is, when are you gonna bring us more stuff? So that was my very first trip, and it didn't go as well as I thought. But then many years later, I joined COTN, Children of the Nations. When I joined COTN, I began to realize what the real problem was because I had the opportunity to sit with people. And I'll never forget when I first went to Malawi, and one of the small children that were there, he was a baby that must have weighed maybe, I would say 2 or 3 pounds, and he's very, very tiny, and a mother brings him in, and she's asking for help, and my first heart reaction was, oh my goodness, what can we do? We must take this baby in, how do we help? And I'll never forget our nurse Charity saying to me, that's not what we do here. What we will do is provide milk and formula for the mother and for the father and make sure that they can take care of that child. What we'll do is make sure that we support the family and we do family strengthening, but it's not necessary for us to take that baby. And it really taught me a lesson. Because my initial reaction was, how do I take control of the situation? I'll never forget also when I first started and our CEO, Chris Clark, said to me, hey, we have a big problem. We've been raising kids for 22 years. We started when they were babies. And now they're 20, 21 years old, they're graduating high school and college, and the unemployment rate is over 50%, and they still can't get jobs. So their traditional way of doing things, when Chris would show up or I would show up, they would say, Dad, we need some money. Auntie, we need money, help us out. And it was a huge problem for us. So we said, how do we solve this? And we started what we call business connections, where we brought business people like yourselves into Malawi. We taught them Christian entrepreneurship, and then we gave them very small loans to get started. And I can tell you today, we have over 62 kids who have finished the program. 43 of them have started their own businesses, and they are taking off like wildfire. And guess what? We don't have to be there to hold their hands. Many of you talked about the people in your communities, how they're scrappy and they're just out there willing to do whatever. And these are these kids, and when we gave them that first start, I'm on their WhatsApp channel now, and every morning one of them is starting a new business: hair salons, barbershops, solar panels where they can plug in people's phones. These kids who had nothing and were begging on the streets are now building their own brick homes with iron sheets on the roof, which is a big deal in Africa when you have iron sheets on your roof. And we're watching these kids thrive and survive with just a little bit of input from us. And then I can think about the Kamalatu women in a village in Magwai who, these women have absolutely nothing. And every time they would greet me, they would just greet me with the love of Jesus, and they would dance and sing, and most of them were not wearing any shoes, and they just wear their tchinje, and they would just say, sometimes, we just want to take care of our families. How can we work together? So we said, well, here's a big problem that we have. We keep having to buy mosquito nets for all of our kids in our countries. And if you look on the World Health Organization website, all of the mosquito nets that they buy are bought in China. And we said, well, there's got to be something wrong with this, because all of the malaria is in Africa, but yet I can buy them retail, but I can't get manufactured mosquito nets in Africa. So we simply went out and bought these women 4 sewing machines, treadle sewing machines, and encouraged them to look at making mosquito nets. And here I come back in with my schematics and diagrams and going to show them what the pattern is and how to make it. And they looked at me and said, oh, this will not work. And I felt really bad. I was so discouraged. And I went home and I came back 6 months later, and these women were making mosquito nets like crazy. And I said, well, how did you figure this out? Of course, I wasn't there. How did you do this without me? And they said, watch. And the mosquito nets around, and they had a nail and a string and a pencil on the end of the nail, and they literally kind of made like a homemade protractor and learned how to make the circle that they needed to make for the net. And they said it was easy. It was easy once I got out of the way. And so now my mindset started changing, and I started realizing everything that you've heard today is that having a mind for the poor is hard work, but it's what causes human flourishing and causes them to thrive. So now here's my big challenge. I come back and I'm doing sustainability at Children of the Nations, and all of this is making sense to me, but my partners, my churches, aren't getting it. They're still wanting to travel with me to go play with the cute kids. It's a challenge. Because what we were realizing is with a lot of these children, we were just re-traumatizing these kids over and over again when we would bring people in who would get close to them and play with them for 2 weeks and then leave. And God bless our hearts, our intentions were good, but we were doing the wrong things. So I go to church partners and I say, we have to start doing things a little bit differently. And we want you to come with us, but we want it to look a little different than the way it's looked in the past. And one of my favorite partners, Summit Church, and I was hoping they were going to be here with us tonight, they got it. And what they said to me was, let's sit down together and figure this out. Let's go to Malawi together and figure out how we can do asset mapping together, because we want to get this firsthand. We want to understand the transformation that you've had. How do we have that same transformation? So we started talking about how do we realign the church, the nonprofits, and the poor. And the poor is a broad context because it means the physically poor, spiritually poor, or anyone who's in a system of oppression. So one of the things we had to do is we had to really look at the church and say, what does the church traditionally do? And you know the same scriptures that we always have, go and make disciples of all nations. Here I am, Lord, send me. And the church was very much about, we need to go. But what we weren't looking at is, why are we going? And what do we want the outcomes to be once we get there? The churches that we worked with were very familiar with working with long-term missionaries, people who would literally pack up and go and stay for 20 or 30 years in a country. But they weren't used to doing what we've been talking about today. How do we strategically align and sit as partners in the countries that we want to serve? Not to be the savior, not to be the one who's going to fix it, but we're going to sit there with you in a reciprocal relationship and learn from each other. So it used to be very simple. It used to be the church plus missionaries would equal evangelism and impact for the poor. But then this is what happened. Things started coming up, words like human trafficking, sustainability, microfinance. And let's be really honest, many churches are not equipped to deal with these situations. So the emergence of the nonprofit, the Christian nonprofit, is to be there as that partner with our churches. To be there to talk about things like economic impact, to talk about sustainability, to talk about outcomes. This is what the Christian nonprofit needs to partner with the church in order to get the outcomes that we're looking for in the countries that we serve. So it's not for the nonprofit to come and do this by themselves, which is what's happened in many of our sectors. The nonprofit has come in, the nonprofit is now working with the community, and the church is kind of taking a step back and saying, well, yeah, we'll give you a little bit of money every once in a while, and let's see how that works. And that's not the right model. The right model is for the nonprofit and the church to work together. Because, see, these are the challenges that we have. We have donor fatigue. I have congregation fatigue. Unfortunately, I'm sometimes ministering to people who just want to have an emotional experience in a country. They just want to go see the kids. They want to check a box. And I don't have a solution for that. Because when I'm then catering to people who want to just check a box and have an experience, then guess who gets left out? The community member that I'm trying to serve. Because I'm sending resources that they don't need, because I can't remember who said earlier, I think it was Rick, put his shoe up on the table and said, here's my shoe. I'm sending shoes into places where maybe we really need to be sending food, or I'm sending food into places where people actually have farmland, and really what they need is to learn how to farm and how to do drought-tolerant farming. So we have mixed messages. And what happens is our donors get fatigued, our churches get fatigued, we get fatigued, but most importantly, the people in the communities that we serve get fatigued. So we have realigned, and as we're wrapping up, I'm not going to go through these slides. These will be on the deck if you want to look at it later. But there's questions that we need to ask. And the thing is, are you asking the right questions? Is the church asking the partner, what's the end game here? And how long are we going to be in this community? When do we get to exit? What's our exit strategy? And not that we want to leave, but when do we start transferring dependence from us to the people that we want to serve? The nonprofits have to ask questions like, to the community, who are the key stakeholders? Who's going to be responsible for this? How do we not build dependence when we go into our countries? And then we have to make sure that the community members and the stakeholders are at the table. So many times, all of us on our boards, whether it's our church board or a nonprofit board, we sit at the table and we make decisions for people across the world, and they're not even at the table to have the conversation with us. So these are the important things that we've been working on. This is what my organization is looking at. The church is so critical to what we do. We can't do this work without the church. But we need the church to be a partner. We need the church to be engaged. And we don't want to go into this alone. And we want business people, smart business people who are in that Business Connections program to work with us, but also to work with the church and through the church to get the results that all of us want at the end of the day. So I just want to end and wrap up by saying, I invite you to come and see what God is doing. Not an invitation to come and change things, fix things, or to heal things. God is already doing that. Our job in the nonprofit sector and in the church is simply to come and witness what God is already doing and sit there with these women and children and see what God calls you to in that moment. But it is not for us to try to be the answer. God is the answer, and we're his hands and feet, and he's calling us into this mission field. So I thank you for listening. I think we're wrapping up for the night, so this has been great. All the speakers going before have been just amazing and incredible, and it's just been an awesome opportunity to be here. So thank you.